So, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. uh, but no, I really like, which is why I took a stab at looking at how it might, overlay on the grid.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I do, and the comment you made on the last call about being able to use it and convert it into an activity list, I
yeah,
think is a
yeah.
great thought as well, which is what I had done with the work done by Deloitte Insights when they
Mhm.
came up with the six critical factors for being a DE and I leader.
Right, right, right. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's the best thing is to convert the world of DEI into good activity lists um, that are stemming off of whatever the instruments are that you might be using. Because, when I thought about the model itself for diversity awareness, I was going like, well, we can see how it overlays. And it does overlay to a certain degree, but it wasn't trying to overlay. It's got a totally different purpose. It's got a totally different kind of vantage point from it. So that's why when I went like, well, if we were just going to say, what could we bring to that model or to the practitioners of that model, it really is using the change grid as that next step.
Yeah, and that's a very widely used model
Yeah,
by practitioners.
yeah, sure.
So, many that I know have used it with clients,
Yeah.
or simply are aware of it. And
Yeah.
so it was a very popular tool back in the days of the Pro Group before they sold out.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Now, was there also a kind of a methodology to follow up the results of that? I mean, we're just trying to operationalize it or
Mhm.
actionate it, create a new verb, whatever we're trying to do. We're just saying like, it's great that people have all this awareness, but okay, now what? You know?
Yeah, and that's been the challenge in the work is the now what
Yeah.
piece. So a lot of companies were doing the awareness piece, but there wasn't a whole lot going on after that.
Right, 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 right. Well, then that's where, anyone who's got change grids in their quiver, you're well positioned to take care of that because ultimately it's just going to boil down to we need to start doing certain things and stop doing certain things and continue doing certain things. Uh,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if we can
I,
identify those things, we can create a change grid.
Now, one of the things we would do back then is use that stop, start, continue instrument,
Yeah.
which I believe they incorporated into the work that they were doing with the diversity awareness profile.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, yeah.
But think about that. The moment someone says, well, start, stop, continue doing, it's like, all right, they're implying that there's a pile of activities that one could
Hmm.
decide whether to start, stop, or continue. Well,
Hmm.
what if I could show you currently whether your people are stopping, starting, or continuing, and what the likelihood is of them changing? Would that be useful to you? Well, obviously, I believe the answer is yes, but
Yeah, well, one of the things that I began doing and ultimately shared with the faculty is taking that stop, start, continue uh, from each of the students or participants in the workshops, and then look at what they said they would stop, start, and continue doing, and identify or associate that with the various energy factors
yep, yep, yep.
to be able to look and see, well, are they, and then I would run the statistics on it and began to share those stats with the class because usually those were like 2 day classes, and
Right.
so on day two I could come back and show them statistically what that looks like from an energy perspective, and it
Right.
was interesting. It was interesting data.
Let's go back to that model for just a second. I don't know if it's in this pile or this slide deck or not, but you said that the four energies, and then I believe it was Shags or Boris added the one that's really a social kind of an energy. What were your other ones? I'm trying to figure out if I've got the illustration.
On the energies.
Yeah, the four human energies.
Yeah, so it was spiritual, mental,
Yeah.
emotional, and physical.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Right, and we added something. I remember it's something that would be speak more to the center as we shifted one around. I'm trying to see if I've got that background. I'd be curious.
Yeah,
I think it's in the other pile. You know, we do so many of these. At a certain point, you go, whatever happened to blah, blah, blah? So,
right, right.
anyway, it'd be very interesting, though, because obviously, if people have an appreciation for what energy would be currently displayed for each of those activities or the desired, well, they're just talking the ChangeWorks language right there. So it should be a pretty easy add-on for that. Yeah. Uh,
Right.
so here's a gifted student's question for all of you on the call. Where does start, stop, and continue? So obviously this whole start, stop, continue thought or model is something that's supposed to fit into someone's conversation regarding a change initiative at whatever level it happens to be. So if you think about the path of self-discovery, is that white step, green, currents, desired solution? Where do you think this series of questions fits in to your overall dialogue? Anybody, where would you put it?
Well, it's supposed to be solution based.
And so is it solution based? Where were the solution possibilities talked about?
More, certainly more outgrid.
Right.
Is that what you're pointing towards?
Yeah, well, it is more outgrid because it's something that's more definitive. It's like if we're going to have a conversation that ends up at a place where we're saying this is what we need to start doing, stop doing, continue doing. Um, how did I get to the point of even knowing what was on the list of things to start, stop, and continue doing? So I'm bringing this up only because I can kind of see how the whole start, stop, continue is something that comes up as early as the current situation, as the white step of the path of self-discovery. So what are you currently doing? Now, as far as the white step is concerned, I could say, what have you also done up to now that you're no longer doing? So I can always look at history. History is part of the current situation, but I can see how I could use part of it to just say, what are you doing? And then when I get on to the yeah, get onto the green, we can start talking about, well, what are some of the things that we could be doing, or what are we trying to accomplish? And so what could we be doing to get to that? And then we have to get to the barriers. And probably the barriers are more an exploration of what we need to stop doing. Yeah, and then the solution, I think, is where you get to the decision points on all those things. So this is what we'll continue doing. We got that from our white step, and this is what we're going to start doing. And that probably came to thought during the green step, and this is what we got to stop doing, and that came to us during the obstacles step. So yeah, anyway, I just think that it kind of applies to almost all the areas of the change of the process. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, other thoughts before we launch into the subject matter for today? Nope. All right, so here's something I would like to introduce to you guys and talk about. This is something that came from advanced ChangeWorks training. Long ago, we used to talk about, well, what does someone who's just learning the basics of tension management really need to know? And when you first start using a change grid, what do you really need to know? And if you want to apply this to sales or leadership or whatever area of business you want to talk about, well, what do you need to know? Well, by the time we looked at the full body of stuff we had put together, and the ramblings of discussions that we've had over all these kinds of years, there's ends up being a very small selection of everything we've ever talked about that we actually teach, we actually use. There's this whole pile of other stuff that we thought was either too esoteric or didn't have any real kind of market for it, wasn't really going to enhance the work we were trying to do with our clients and with the people we'd certified to use it with their clients. So I thought, I'm going to bring a couple of pieces out of that pile and bring it to your guys' attention just to see if you find it interesting, and kind of go from there. So you guys kind of up to a little bit of an exploration of things that are perhaps a little bit outside of the practical. Yeah,
Sure.
good. All right. I'm so glad. Because otherwise I have a very tedious subject we could talk about, but I didn't feel like it. All right, so you guys have probably heard me say this before, that every person has their own little change grid, but our individual change grid as we experience is not representative of the grand change grid of life. So as we first started putting these thoughts together and seeing what these thoughts could actually help us to better understand, one of the thoughts that came up was that there exists at the universal level a change grid that has a spot on it for every single possible behavior a human being could ever display. And it had to also encompass the greatest challenges that are possible in the world of human experience, and the greatest levels of ability and the greatest levels of importance, and also the tiniest of each one of those things. And so the thought was that if we could understand that there exists at some grand universal sort of level a change grid or whatever shape it takes that gives a spot for every single possibility in the world of human experience. If we could kind of envision that and accept that, can we then also recognize that every individual has their own personal change grid? And while it may feel very complete to them, it is really nothing but a subset. It's nothing but one little bubble that's floating around in this grand universe that the change grid should actually encompass. Is that interesting to you guys? Is that too, I mean, give me some feedback. I could babble about it, but is it something that you find interesting? And if so, why? So anybody? Yeah, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be interested in it, just because it has that intellectual challenge to it. So
Good,
uh, I would
good.
certainly be interested in exploring it.
Yeah. Now, and by the way, at the same time that you guys are answering this, you guys are already students of the subject matter. You find it interesting, or you wouldn't be continuing to expand your understanding as we work our way through these Circle of Brilliance calls. But um, it could have a practical thing, because I could say, just like there's the grand universe, the grand change grid of life with lots of reverb behind it, can I also say that each corporation represents its own change grid? And inside of that, we're looking at the corporations, the group's full range of ability. It too is a subset of this grand change grid of life. But and inside of it, if you will, are all the individuals with their change grid, and then so obviously there's lots of empty space if we're depicting this as a three-dimensional kind of an object. But you get the idea. We can take any part of the universe and see if it has a subset change grid, and inside of that subset change grid, where are the individuals? So where I think that might actually be interesting is to recognize that when I talk about a sub grid on the change grid, maybe what I'm describing is a culture by some definition, that every corporation has its own little culture. Societies have cultures. Geographical areas all have cultures. We understand cultures exist at many, many, many different levels, and that any one individual at any given moment in time is actually a member of more than one of those cultures or subcultures, as the case may be. So can you start feeling that there are grids inside of grids inside of grids? Yet at the individual level, we hold the belief that this is the full truth as far as we're concerned. Are you guys okay with that? Is that interesting? Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
Tim,
I definitely
Kathy, yeah,
agree
go
with
ahead.
that. Yeah, I definitely agree with that because those cultures and organizations are in part established by the ones who hold the power in those organizations. And
Yeah.
so their values and beliefs become the ways of the culture, if you will, or the cultural norms of
Mhm.
the organization because they implement them either through policy or practice.
Yeah. Yep. And they look for people who fit in to their particular world, or they work to get the people to fit more, I don't want to say fittingly, but to be better matched for the environment. So there's lots happening there. Kathy, what did you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly makes sense. I mean, I think that holds true that we're microcosms and then there are macrocosms and there are, connections among those. So I can't argue with that concept.
All right. So now I bring this up because, and again, I don't think this is marketable. Maybe if I was a philosophy professor, we could bring this up, and maybe that's what we've just done. But I don't really know how what we're saying is practical for a student to learn. Obviously, those of us that are in the industry, we do understand that um, every client that we work with is different. It has its own experience of what outgrid means and upgrid means and ingrid and downgrid, it's got their own little kind of thing. And we know if we go to our next client, they might have different sorts of experiences or ideals that match each one of these. And so no two clients are the same. No two individuals inside of the client are the same, but everyone carries within it whether we're looking at an organization or looking at an individual, they carry within it a full change grid. And this full change grid is what their experiences or their range of experiences actually represent. Now, one of the reasons why I think that's interesting to look at is because people often wonder, well, what happens outside of these borders? What's going on out here? What if there was a challenge of a 13 because I thought I knew what impossible was? Or maybe there was some sort of a conquest that is bigger than a 12-12. What about a conquest that, it's got to be 13-13 because as I grow and I learn, my change grid is constantly expanding. So because my change grid is constantly expanding, I have to be able to now absorb or incorporate or stretch to touch what I would have thought was a 13-13, but maybe now it's my new 12-12. So I like to think about this because we have to be able to make room for the truth that human beings are constantly evolving as individuals, as groups, as society as a whole, as perhaps even at a species level. We're constantly changing. Well, changing means that we are redefining what we know to be truth or what we know to be the best way to operate inside of that truth. And so I wanted to be able to do that so I could help people understand that um, what we thought was a 10-10 experience when we were a kid, and what we thought a 10-10 experience was when we were a teenager or a young adult or someone who's starting our career, that set of coordinates and every set of coordinates elsewhere in the change grid is constantly being redefined as a result of our life experiences. Um, are we okay with that? Yeah, Brian, you joined a little bit later. We're talking about esoteric stuff on the philosophy of the change grid and change grid anatomy. So,
Well, that definitely makes sense to me in terms of the growth dynamic because I look at myself and when I used to take all of these different kinds of brain assessments, and it said I'm a whole brain thinker. But then when I look at these so-called strength themes, like one of them is achievement. And
mhm,
so I'm always outgrid seemingly, but I do know achieving things in my 50s has unique purpose, unique reach, unique frame than when I was in my 20s.
yeah,
That's
yeah, exactly.
very different for me right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think that redefinition sort of part of a human's experience, has to then imply that the universe as we know it is also always expanding. And I know there's lots of physicists who will say that sort of a thing, but we can join them today if we go like, no, if we're really saying that humanity is a representative of the whole universe, well, then whatever's happening at the human level should also be happening at the universal level. So I don't know where the universe ends. I don't know that our brains have even the capacity or the capabilities to go there. You know, it might be too big for us to handle, just like I think as we start thinking smaller and smaller, more and more, you know, microscopically, there comes a point where tiny becomes so tiny we might not even be able to conceive of it yet, but at least we hold the belief that there is something beyond the constraints of the human experience as we know it individually, collectively, etc. Yeah, thoughts about that? All right, so if we can handle that, then I just want to show you that what I'm really saying is that somewhere on this change grid, your change grid floats. So we start talking about personality typing and we say, oh, you know, well, this person is very outgoing, but they always have an agenda. You know, they're always trying to make things happen, but they want to make things happen by getting people to be enthusiastic, etc. And that's how they always are in all the ways that I experience them. All right, so where on the change grid does that person live? Does that personality live? You know, does it sound like they belong down here in the grand change grid of life? Or are they over here somewhere? You know, where is the person who's trying to make stuff happen? Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, you're saying they always have an agenda. I mean, they could be anywhere in the power area.
So they're in power.
Yeah, you know, that I would probably put them slightly below the heart line in the analytical area, because they're thinking about having you know, they think about having an agenda. Not everyone does. People can be quite active and deliberate without having an agenda. So that's kind of where I would put them if I were to put them somewhere on the grid.
Yeah, yeah. So in the big subset, they feel because they're trying to make something happen and they're trying to figure out the course. Now, when we start to say, and they're doing it by keeping everybody enthusiastic, maybe we start to shift a little bit up grid. So the epicenter would be kind of like right there. So, and by the way, none of this is there's no right answer to this. This is all conceptual sort of stuff, but they live in a certain place, and wherever we put them, that's what we're really kind of looking at to get this thing started. All right, so that's first thing. Our world as we know it actually sits somewhere on a subset of the full range of possibilities. Now, the second question for you to think about is, what is your spread? So is your change grade really something that's, say, this tiny? And where you fit into the grand change grid of life is in some really minuscule little area of the whole field, but for you, it still feels like a complete existence. Oh, you know what I mean? Or is your spread a bit bigger than the average? And so, yeah, you might be leaning downgrid, but you've got a lot of possibility to be a bit more upgrid and enthusiastic, a bit more outgrid and driven, you know? Where do you live? And then, yeah, so I think that this is an interesting thing to think about, because how many of you want to fill your calendars with clients who are here? Anybody, you want to work with these people? Or would you rather work with these people? Or maybe these people? You know, you've got your own place where you go energetically. That's the group I like to work with. And so you've got your own change grid, but you're also looking at where all the rest of the people in this grand change grid of life sort of, yeah, thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I was just having a conversation with some of the I guess you can call them indigenous people here in Nicaragua. And we're talking about lifestyles in different countries and places like that. And they said their perspective is like a lot of we're missing out of learning from nature itself when it comes to humanity. Like we're disconnected is their perspective. Because although they live in these rural areas, quite, one would say poor on a social economic scale,
Yes.
their level of happiness, they're content.
Yeah, of
Like
course
they
they
don't
are. Right,
they
right.
don't want all the material kinds of things. And so for them, they say the more you have that, it seems like those are the people who, and of course they make generalizations, but they say those are the people who are disconnected from self. And it becomes this
Mm.
exterior kinds of focus more so than the internal. So there's this disconnect in terms of alignment and understand how both can interact. And so they even mentioned how it seems like because there's pushback for us to be here, right? So the pushback is, yeah, when the healthcare system, especially like when researchers go into other countries, they may research on the population, but they take it back to
Yeah.
their country.
Yeah.
And so they said instead of focusing on extraction, you need to focus on community. And they were naming all these various things, and I think it blew a lot of people away with the pushback.
Right. Well, let's take a little look at this then from the grand change grid of life perspective. So again, what we're looking at, this is the full range of possibility throughout the entire universe. So now we're saying, Brian has just said that there is a population, and that population is a population. Now, keep in mind that population is a full range inside of their culture or whatever. They've got the full range of possibilities. But on the grand change grid of life, they tend to be in a life that they've really figured it out. They've actually figured it out to the point that they can enjoy some real happiness and some real contentment with what's going on. Now, are they downgraded because their challenges are all so low and their ability is so high? Are they a little bit more centered in the change grid where they are truly at peace with just the way they are, even though they're being judged as being different than they are? Okay, so we got to figure out where is that population, and then you've got Brian's team that are out there trying to make some stuff happen. Well, if Brian's team is really more outgrid, there's a huge mismatch here because they're not even in the range of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Or are they just there going through the motions?
No, they're definitely more outgrid.
They're definitely more outgrid because they've decided maybe they're outgrid and upgrid where there's more of that expressive energy and they have a real passion around it that's trying to change the world. But is the world they're trying to change interested in changing?
Right. The words they use specifically that they gave me feedback on, they said a lot of times when you come from, Western cultures, they said there's a difference for them between community and individualism. There's a difference between contribution and extraction.
All
And
right.
so what they're wondering is, are your models, which side of that equation is your models based on that you're offering us? Because we don't want to lose that sense of our humanity.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can comment here, I've spent a lot of time studying these cultures, and there is an interesting article written recently by a Dutch organization designer who there's a company called Buurtzorg. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Brian, in the Netherlands, that offers healthcare, and they offer healthcare from a real community-based model, community-based perspective, and someone compared their model to the indigenous cultures who approach healthcare, in Malaysia and other places, as having that type of flatter community-based approach where clearly it's not about the individual. I mean, almost all indigenous cultures are based on community rather than individual. What's best for the community, you know, and the health of the individual is not separated from the community. And this company Birdsong has been doing that type of, it takes that kind of approach where whatever is healthy for the community is also healthy for the individual and vice versa. So there are a lot of organizations around the world who are beginning to take on that model because they're understanding that it makes sense not only for indigenous people but for a lot of disenfranchised, you know, quote unquote modern societies. This whole idea is sort of alien, you know, to our culture, which is the extreme of individualism, and the healthcare system is the extreme of individualism. But anthropologists have been working with community-based healthcare models for a really long time. So there's a lot to be gained by pursuing that approach, and taking a look at some of the companies that are actually doing that also happen to exist in Western culture.
Awesome. How do you say that company? The name?
Burtzorg, Burtzorg, Burtzorg. It's in the Netherlands, but it's one of a few that I know of. But yeah, there's a lot written about it. I mean, you Google that and you're going to get tons of stuff.
Oh, very nice. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I can send you the article later if you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then for a situation to be successful, we have to recognize and honor where this population is on the change grid. And by the way, that's our perception of that population. We're not in the population. We got to figure out how big is its range of operating on the grand change grid, where is its epicenter, and then from there we have to then go like, well, I got to go and get them. You know, it's like I can't stay up here and them over there. We're not working together. We're not even close to one another. Am I expecting for this one to grow to come and meet me? Or am I the one who's expected to either move or expand my own thinking so that sooner or later we can at least overlap and have some area where commonality might be able to be explored?
Mm.
You can see why this to me this is so
Yeah, I love this. I love this.
well.
I
I mean, I
think
think it's
about
fun
this
to
all
think
the
about.
time.
Yeah, I think it's great fun to think about. I just don't know how to, you know, that it's all that monetizable. Again, they might teach it at some, you know, university level, but yeah.
You know what? I've been thinking about this for a long time, particularly from the perspective of like what Kathy was just describing. How do we do things on a community level? But also, how do we make it so that it's regenerative? I was introduced some time ago. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's called the seventh generation principle. And
The
it's
second generation principle. Okay.
Yeah,
and with
it's Native
this
American. Yeah, it's
right.
Native. Yeah, yeah.
And so you make choices and decisions, and you're thinking 7 generations out in terms of the impact it will have. And I think that's so in other words, you have this micro focus, but macro focus, but you're doing things on a micro level to align with that macro focus. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of times when we talk about regenerative kinds of communities and making choice and decisions, I think that's a tension management perspective, because we have to give attention to the elements that's going to help us create that kind of value.
And so, how would you assess the organization you're part of?
I think they're not aligned at all with like the whole Covey thing, seeking first to understand then be understood, because they're coming in with ideas, but what I'm trying to get them to do is to step back and I call it ops. Let's observe first and let the observation teach us, guide us where to participate.
Yeah.
That's the ops.
Yeah,
And
that's
so they're coming in with these grand ideas, and this is how it can be done. And that's the pushback that they're experiencing. So there's
yeah.
definitely a malalignment.
Right. And so that's my thought is like on the grand universe. I don't know how big the scope is or anything like that, but it seems to me that your group is coming in with an agenda and a sense of urgency.
Hmm.
So you saw the shifts I just made. They have an agenda, they want it, they're driven to do something, and they have a sense of urgency around doing it. Now, that might be the wrong place for them to be altogether to be effective in what's going on. But if they think that their mission is strong enough and one way or another, in fact, I think it was Alexander the Great who at one point was quoted as saying something to the effect of that if he had to, he would bring the Russian population kicking and screaming into the 20th century. So
Mm.
it's like people come along and say, well, these people don't know any better. They might think that they're happy, but they don't know what happy is. I'm going to see if, it's like value judgments are being made from from a place of ignorance.
Hmm.
So why are we messing with these people? So Brian, why are you guys messing with this population?
And see, this is something that was funded by the World Health Organization. So when those funds come down to these countries, what it tends to generate are these public-private partnerships. But I don't even see them on the same wavelength, so to speak.
Right,
Like
right.
there's this malalignment all around. And so it's almost like the World Health Organization is our papa, and they figured out how we can best live amongst ourselves, kind of a thing. And now everyone's coming in with, that urgency that you talked about with these funds, and the
Oh
funds can
yeah.
dry up, and we got to use it. But
Right, right.
I'm with the community. I'm pushing back on all of that. And saying, no, that's not the way you do it. I've been seeing this growing up in Africa where they come and do the research and then take the research out. And so it never gets to the people whom live there,
Right, right.
right?
But I'm just curious to know whether or not this population that this group is targeting wants to be targeted.
I don't think they did necessarily, or not in the way that is going. They wanted to improve things because, again, if you can imagine, during the pandemic, there was a lot of pen and paper in terms of tracking who was infected, who was vaccinated, all these different kinds of things. So they said we probably can level up a little bit,
Okay,
but
and
they don't want
who
too
is
much changes,
right,
right?
but who is saying that? The actual population that's being targeted or the people that are the go-between you guys and the population?
No, the population actually filed for that grant.
All right, and so that means the
Yeah,
population, again, I'm trying to figure out where does the population live on the Grand Change Grid.
right,
So that says the population was aware of the point that they could get better in terms
right,
of ability. All right,
definitely.
so we're going to shrink them back a little bit here, but they still continue to feel as though they were doing overall, they liked what they had created. They liked the life, they liked, you know,
Yeah, it's
right. They're
simple.
happy, is what you said.
Yeah, it's very simple because you start adding technology to some of this stuff, and then they get kind of skittish and like, oh, okay, yeah, we think it can help, but how is this going to um, shift the way that we think we should live? Like,
Right.
is it going to be
Right.
abrupt? And so there's no preparation for that. People are just coming in and saying, this is how you can do it. And I'm like, let's ask some
Right, right, right.
questions first.
And what are the cultural costs? Because things are going to change and all that. But
Yeah,
again, I think that it's a great example to just wonder whether or not the effectiveness of an organization is going to be dependent by proximity to the targeted population.
right.
For me to be effective, do I need to better understand where they're at, what they're trying to do, as opposed to coming in and almost imposing, myself on them, going over there and you will change, blah, blah, blah.
I think we need to be close because one of the things that I've seen in my experience, and I'll be interested in hearing from others, that human beings are woefully unaware of all of the unintended consequences of even making certain changes, right? And
Mhm.
we've seen this happen during the pandemic with some of the parameters, and so now kind of reap the benefit of those unintended consequences. And a lot of policies that were made are you know, under the same vein. There's some unintended consequences that come with it that could stick with the generation for a long time until they actually change.
Yeah, yeah. And along with that, those early stages, it's the way these two groups are going to be interacting with one another that will mold the way the targeted population views the population that's trying to help them, at least on the surface or whatever. So if this doesn't go well, then there's going to be generational resistance to perhaps, the World Health Organization coming in. Oh, they came in once before and blah, blah, blah. We'll be more cautious next time. So can you guys kind of feel that there would be, if this doesn't work right, there could be increasing challenges in getting it to work right at some point down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very strong comment, feeling, and perspective on this. We've been operating from a colonial model for quite some time, and our, globalization operated from a colonial model in which U.S. corporations went around and basically said, we're going to make companies all around the world look like our American companies, and wondered why, oh my God, why isn't this working well, and why aren't we effective, and why is there a backlash? So there's that piece. From the standpoint of indigenous people, the efforts of white colonial people to change them has been going on from day one of colonialism, and it's decimated them because it's totally disrupted the culture. So there is a lack of respect that exists there, and it is such a deep paradigm in our culture to be colonial, even though we think we're above and beyond all of that. It is just such a deep paradigm, and we see it, I'm sure, Tim, you see it all the time in DEI work, where there's no respect for the actual validity of the cultures that exist and the actual solutions that they bring. So until there's the willingness to truly partner out of respect, I don't think that they're, because of course they want technology and they want change, and people, in indigenous cultures want to be able to get help because they're stuck in the middle of this morass. But without the respect of what they have to offer, it just leads to more destructiveness and trauma, and even more issues around mental health in those populations. Has been the, it's not even an opinion of mine, that's been the track record. So I think that's kind of what you're dealing with here, Brian, is my guess. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. My suggestion to them is that they pause in terms of getting someone on the ground engaged, right, from their perspective, because I think that's a missing point. Now, when I said that, of course, is pushback in terms of what the grant provides and all these different kinds of things. But I'm like, who would go to, and I know the answer, but I'm like, who would go to another country and presume you got it? You know it better than them that are there. That doesn't make sense to me. So the change grid in my head says, yeah, we need to pause and let's understand, get someone on the ground there. I'll even stay here and live amongst the people, like find out what's really going on. Like, how do they see their everyday activity?
Yeah, that's what anthropologists did.
Well,
You've just described anthropology. I mean, that's what it was all about. Yeah.
As he was describing it, I said, all right, well, because the point is, I don't know that this one can move there, and I don't know that that one can move there. They're too different. They're too established. I need somebody who can be the go-between
Mm.
Who's that going to be? And Brian, if this represents you, this is what you're trying to do, is advocate on behalf of these individuals, and at the same time, try to mobilize these people in the most effective way possible. That, by the way, would put you right on top of the advocate.
Is that the advocator or the?
The
Oh, okay,
advocator.
the advocator
Well,
leader.
reformer is also there as well, but reformer as a word feels like it's a little bit closer to, like it's a blend of advocator and leader. Reformer, because advocator and thinker is just the one who's in their head, knows what could be done or blah, blah, blah. But when I think of reformer, I think someone's actually doing something. And so that might be that halfway spot between advocator and leader. But anyway, that's where your energy feels like it would be based on how you're characterizing.
So to Kathy's point, to like go there, like the anthropologist kind of mindset where you're studying, I hate to use that word, but like you're studying the people, you're getting an understanding. Is that still the advocator role?
Well, think about that. Part of what she's saying for anthropology, and Kathy, feel free to correct me or flesh out what I'm saying, is there is a very great appreciation for the analytical energy, this understanding, wanting to expand the base of understanding, etc. Yet the anthropologist also, because of their awareness of other cultures and other ways of doing things, has access to at least the knowledge of better ways of doing things or beneficial things that might help this particular population. And so, yeah, they could be there purely to study it, which would be more of a downgrade kind of thing. But somewhere inside of the world of anthropology, there's also a group of advocates for the change, maybe reformers, ambassadors, those sorts of things that are forming this bridge. Kathy, is that a
Yeah,
fair?
I mean, there's the schools of anthropology that, that you are there to observe and not to change.
Right,
And
right.
then there's the school that says you are there to observe and also enable moves away from highly destructive change. To enable people to acculturate or move into a different world if they need to. So there are two kinds. There have been those kinds of anthropologists for many, many years, that
Right.
different approaches.
So you've
And
said, let me throw this on there. You've said that some are more the detached scholarly types, were there to study it, and some are a little bit more intervention, perhaps, if they think something
yeah,
really needs to be changed. So I'm doing this and laying these all on top of each other. People understand that there are all sorts of populations that are overlapping, but there's still none of them cover the full change grid. This is where that's happening. And inside of this are individuals. Where exactly is Brian? Where exactly is Kathy? Where exactly is the whoever the anthropologist might end up kind of being?
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah,
That
but
when you get into the reformer level of changing, that's when you run the risk of what I call the colonialism model, because you can do it, and you can do it with all good intentions, but you have to be extremely careful in that process
yep,
of not disenfranchising, disrupting, destroying. What is the good?
right.
What is
Mm.
positive? Yeah,
Mm.
So
in the
you make
existing
sure
culture.
you've been invited into this subculture, to help them in some way that they're aware of, and maybe you can suggest other things you could do that they're not aware of but would benefit them. It's all about the style thing. And so, do I want someone who's going to be even further outgrade and go in and say, oh no, you need to do this, you must do this, blah blah? Is this the energy that I want? Do I want someone who's a little bit more on the science side of things, more analytical? Do I want them to be shifted a little bit so they're also more compassionate about what's going on? So there's more of an amiable energy, you know?
Interesting. I like
So,
this.
well, I think it's a fun thing to think about, but I don't know where it would fit into the kind of training programs any of us are, getting paid to do, but it's there. And there's a lot of content around this whole world of tension management that I think, um, It's good stuff to know, good stuff to understand, but
But I'm thinking about it even, because Kathy introduced me to medical anthropology, and so I have some resources and things about that. But think about even from an organization perspective, right? So
Mhm.
people come into a so-called organizational culture.
Yep.
They have their personal culture, and oftentimes there's malalignment there
Yeah,
in terms of
course.
fit.
Or even a fit between a company and the population they want to serve. So let's say that I'm one of these very downgrid kind of companies. That's the vibe of my place, but the population I'm trying to take care of lives upgrid.
Hmm.
Okay, this is not going to work. So, it's energetically, it's two different worlds.
So
Hmm.
for me, this is really interesting, and I love what Kathy was pointing out there, and that's why I dropped that link in about acculturation,
Mhm.
because I think it's connected to this question of control,
Yeah,
which for me is the spiritual energy, which speaks to and attempts to answer the questions of why and purpose.
yeah,
And T, you even asked Brian, why was this effort taking place, and trying to understand, was it a request
yeah.
or was it, the opposite,
Right.
which
We
I
know
think
better than you.
connects. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so the Berry model is really interesting when we start looking at this and trying to understand, this whole idea of integration and what's really going on around that spiritual energy of control.
That's right. That's right.
Mm.
And it goes back, I mean, historically, we've countless examples, but I think about the Crusades. Well, wait, what? You're going to these places in the world where people don't know who you are, what you're all about, and you're going to make them convert or they die. It's like,
Right, right.
what kind of nonsense is this? So,
Yeah.
but those people were of passion, or if they were just soldiers, they had to do as they were told to do, or whatever the case may be. But they're like, oh no, we're going to impose it on you because our will, we've talked about the whole colonial kind of period, but history is full of examples where one population believes that they are superior to another population and they decide to conquer them or subordinate them or whatever.
Or it's called follow the money.
Follow the money. And that's my thing. Like, yeah, I've always believed the Crusades were about money. So, because somebody at the
They
top of,
were.
well, they were, but I mean, the people that are out there might have believed they were on some sort of grand spiritual mission. That what they were really, the people that were involved, they didn't get the money, they didn't necessarily see the money, they didn't get to keep the money, and so they somehow or another they were manipulated into holding this mindset that somehow or another justified this behavior. And
Mm.
you just go like, what's driving it all? And yeah, I do think it's about control, and for a lot of history, money is what gave you that control, but it could also be power, it could be land holdings, whatever. They were, just trying to grab from somebody
But this
else.
makes me think about the change grid in the head of like uh, people I consider to be like my heroes or people that I like reading biographies. So I remember on a medical missions trip to the Mother Teresa's organization.
Hmm.
And when she was asked, they showed a video of her uh, going out on the streets of Calcutta. When she was asked, like, how do you do this? How do you, when people run away from people with these various diseases in the street, why do you do what you do? And I remember her saying she simply sees God in distressing disguises.
Oh,
So the change grid in her head is like coming from that power point,
yep.
and then she can go out and execute in ways that people just look at that and wonder and just think like, wow, this is fascinating. She always had that, because even when she was belittled for not going to an anti-violence rally, you're this authoritarian figure and people look up to you, she said, I don't go to those rallies because you have two opposing sides where people demonstrate what they say they're against.
Yeah,
She said,
right.
if you have a rally for peace, I will show up.
right? But it should be very peaceful. A rally for peace shouldn't have arguments going on.
Right. So that
Yeah.
change grid in her head was really, guiding her. And I like seeing this kind of conversation because it made me think about these people that I looked up to, the Albert Schweitzer, who built hospitals in the jungles of Africa, and it was all free, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I think is missing from our trainings in humanity about accepting
Well,
one another. Those
yeah.
kinds.
And so, Tim, go right ahead. Go ahead if you want to add something right there. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say that the discussion makes me think of the intersectionality of multiple change grids. When you
Mm,
think in terms of the desired plotting
Yes.
versus the plotting of the respondents,
Yes.
mm,
and how we begin to interpret that variation.
Yes.
And what does it mean? But the interesting thing in connection to our discussion back to the control piece is that wherever the organization desires
Mm-hmm.
is what we operate from, and
That's right.
therein lies that control piece.
That's right. That's right. They
wow.
have their agenda. Well, even
Wow.
let's talk about Mother Teresa for just a second. Mother Teresa started out as a postulate or a novitiate, right? So
Hmm.
she started off, humility was the order of the day. And as
Hmm.
she became more involved and more active, now again, she has a whole change grid. So it's where is she moving upon the grand change grid of life? So what she did was she started to move increasingly further and further out grid. And by the way, she might also have been increasing in her
Mm,
understanding and awareness of what's going on. So she might be expanding. But at a certain point in time, she went from being an amiable, a driven, amiable out here to being an amiable driver, where she was encouraging people. Then she started getting more and more power. She recognized that she had the power of exposure and all that. She became increasingly willing to take on the risk of asking people for what needed to be asked for and doing what needed to be done. And maybe at a certain point in time, she ended up in the grand change grid of life being someone who could actually function as a driver, but what was driving her drivenness was still an amiable enterprise. She realized someone had to step to that leadership role. Now, the question for you guys is, did she just move in her own little self-contained size, or did what was happening was that she was growing from where she started,
that's a good question. Yeah, that's what
you
I
know?
was going to ask. Like, is that possible? Especially for people like that who, what's the word in spiritual terms? They'll say they're enlightened or
Yeah,
something
yep, yep,
like
yep, yep,
that.
yep, 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 yep.
Yeah, so I wonder if that's the case. Like, it's just expanded because I imagine there's pressure on her, as she continued to grow and was, called upon more and more. Imagine
Yeah.
that's an immense amount of pressure. Like I couldn't imagine the role of the president.
Mhm,
They
mhm.
all seem to leave coming in a certain way, and then they leave with a whole bunch of gray hairs.
Yeah, well, you're right. And Lynn and I often comment when we're watching a kind of a law show, it's kind of like, so people actually choose that career? Where they're just arguing with everybody all the time? It's like, wow. I mean, was there not an easier way to make money? So,
Right.
all right, so we're at the top of the hour, but let me go ahead and tell you what I'd like to explore next. If we can appreciate that there is this grand change grid of life, well, and we'll even take it a step further. There's a grand change cube of life. That third dimension is importance. And so not only are we floating around in different places, we also have relative levels of importance that we're attaching to life itself or to what we're doing within the whole movement. So the range of possibilities just grew exponentially. Nevertheless, where do we emanate from? is the one thing, like if I'm over here and that's different than you because you're up here or whatever, and I might be small and you might be really big, and because you've had lots of ranges of experience, blah, blah, blah. Are we all just different and all that? What do we have in common? What is the essential element that unifies all of humanity? And the possibilities that I'd like to explore the next call is, do we all emanate from 0, 0? Is that really where we all begin? We begin back at this little 0, 0, as far as, again, the grand change grid of life, that we're just all right here. We think we're living a whole life because we brought our whole change grid with us, but this is our relationship to the whole of humanity population. And from there, we are always expanding and growing and whatevering, is that how life happens? Or, and I'm not saying these are the only two possibilities, it's just the two I'd like to think about, is what we share in common 6, 6. That no matter where we go, no matter how we grow, the essence of humanity is what we talk about existing at coordinate 6, 6. This art of caring detachment, this being in the world but not of it, appreciating that no matter where we are at any given moment in time, we believe our abilities are moderate and we are facing moderate challenges. We acknowledge that there are abilities and challenges far greater, far lower, et cetera, than anything that we may have experienced. But what we share all in common, if we can get ourselves centered, is that's where we become one. So does humanity emanate from the origin, or do they emanate from the center? Okay, is that interesting? And again, if it's too esoteric, too crazy, we don't need to dwell on it. I just find these kinds of discussions are very interesting to me.
No, I think that's a very interesting topic.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah, so that would be,
Absolutely.
and we'll see where we end up, because then the thing is, like, what are we all on a quest to do? If we all want to unify humanity, what should we focus on as what's driving that unification of humanity? All right. And by the way, again, I don't mind taking you into some crazy levels, but one of the reasons why I appreciate the spiral dynamic so much is because we as humanity think of us as all living inside of our own little spaceship, and we are moving up that spiral. It's like, how are we getting there? Why are we there? What's the whole point? So this can get to be very, very philosophical and metaphysical very quickly if you find
No, but I
it.
think it's important to understand people and the change grid they bring to the table, because that's something that David even asked in the chat there. Like, how does someone downgrade handle upgrade people?
Yep.
So,
Yep. All right. So let's continue this dialogue on next time and see where we end up.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Good conversation, everybody.
Thank you.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.